Welcome to Women Winning Divorce. I am your host, Heather Quick. I am an attorney, entrepreneur, author, and founder of Florida Women's Law Group, the only divorce firm for women by women. I love thinking big, thinking outside the box, creating creative solutions for women, and empowering women to win in all aspects of their life. Our approach at Florida Women's Law Group is to provide women with a strategy to not only achieve their objectives, but win at life. I believe that what may show up as adversity is simply an opportunity to change and improve your life. In each episode, I sit down with innovative professionals and leaders who are focused on how you can be your best self before, during, and after divorce. In these conversations, we are looking at how women can win at life. I have the unique opportunity to meet women when they are at a transition period of life. But that is only the beginning to becoming your best self and winning at life on your terms. With our guests, we enjoy the opportunity to explore ways all women can win and enhance their life, no matter where they are in their journey. Because divorce is just a point in life, not the end and not what defines you, rather a catalyst for your growth. Welcome to today's episode of Women Winning Divorce. I'm Heather Quick, owner and attorney at Florida Women's Law Group. And today I'm joined by Karen Covy. She is an author, self-proclaimed recovering divorce attorney. Going to have to totally get into that, as well as a podcast host, decision-making coach, and much more. Welcome to the show, Karen.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm so excited to have you. And I am also really excited to discuss why hiring a divorce attorney is certainly an investment, but how to also get the most out of it, which is, of course, what we're talking about today, maximizing your divorce investment.
I love this topic because nobody wants to throw money away in a divorce. I don't care how much money you have or don't have. Nobody wants to just hand it all over to their lawyer. So this is a really important topic, I think.
Well, I am very much looking forward to it. So, okay, but I got to ask you questions. Tell us about this recovering divorce attorney. We got to know.
Okay, so I have been a divorce lawyer for more decades than I care to admit to. I just say I count in decades, not in single digits. Okay. And so I did that for a very long time, but I was a trial lawyer before I became a divorce lawyer. So I already had a considerable amount of court experience before I started doing divorce work. So when I got into divorce court and I looked around, what I saw there didn't make sense to me. Like, it didn't make sense on any level, right? If you're going to trial and you have the CEO of some major corporation that, manufactured something that killed babies and you're ripping his face off in cross-examination, no problem. I get that, right? But when it's your spouse and you've got to go sit next to this person at your kid's soccer game that night, like, this didn't make any sense to me, no matter how you sliced or diced it, right? So I kept looking for the better way. That's why I became a mediator. That's why I became a collaborative divorce professional. That's why I became an arbitrator. I kept thinking there had to be a better way. And what I realized is that our system of justice is set up of one party versus another. That's the way it is, right? So immediately when you put a divorce, which is a family, into that situation, you're pitting mother against father, husband against wife. That's just the way the system is. And it's nothing wrong with the system. That's just what it is. And so I kept saying there's got to be a better way. As one person, I'm never going to change the system. Mm-hmm. But what I can do is change the people going into the system so that they do it better. And it's like the whole starfish concept, the ones you throw in, you at least save those. And mm-hmm. So that became my focus. And I realized that as a coach, I had a better chance of doing that than as a lawyer. So I and for a while I thought I could do both. Let's be honest. I thought I could do everything. Why not? Of course. I'm a lawyer. And that didn't work really well because it was too much. And I realized that I had to make a choice. And so I chose coaching because it lets me reach more people and I think maybe do more good in a different way than what lawyers do.
Well, that is quite the journey. And thank you for sharing. And I know, and it gives you just such perspective because I got to say, the longer I do this, which is also the longer, we are on this planet and see situations, it's sometimes you get
really fighting so hard sometimes over things that 5 years from now, you'll be like, I can't believe I spent that much time fighting over it. Or at least you would hope. Not everybody gets there, right? But I think your perspective changes as you see it over time.
It definitely does. And so, and that kind of ties into what we're talking about here today, which is how do you do this better? How do you maximize your investment? Because it's an investment not only in terms of money, but in terms of your life, your lifestyle, your family. Where do you want to be at the end of it? And so even though I am unfortunately no relation to Stephen Covey, I like his approach. You start with the end in mind. And when you do that, if you know what your goal is, if you know what you're shooting at, you have a much better chance of actually getting there than if you just sort of, wander through your divorce, hoping everything will turn out okay.
Exactly. And also, hoping that, and that's the hard part because, our clients, they don't know, they haven't been through it. And they're hoping that attorney is going to be aligned and helping them reach their objectives, but it doesn't always work that way. But let's start off by asking why. Now I know, why do I need to pay for a divorce attorney? Why do our listeners need to pay for a divorce attorney?
Okay, now you're going to get me on my soapbox here, right? and I understand there's a big push, there's online documents, there's so much information. I put out tons of information on my website for people to use for free. So why would you need an attorney? And it comes down to like the old adage, would you do an operation on yourself? If you had cancer, would you cut out the tumor yourself? I mean, you could go online and find out how to do it, I'm sure, but that doesn't make doing it a good idea. And part of the reason is, number one, the education and the experience and the expertise, but also the objectivity that a lawyer brings to the circumstance and the situation. You just don't have it. When it's your life, you can't see the forest for the trees, right? You're too in it to have any kind of objective sense of, is this good or bad or right or wrong, or what are going to be the long-term implications if I do A versus B or C versus D? You just don't know. So having an attorney is of the utmost importance, unless you've been married for like less than 6 months, you own no property together, you don't have children, and you just want to be done. Okay, when there's a limited amount you can screw up, okay, do it yourself if you want. But for most people, you've got to get legal advice. You just have to.
And, of course, the education, training, experience, but it's the objectivity. And, Karen, I've been in that situation, and not a divorce setting, but a situation where I needed legal advice for, issues with my child. And and it was a friend, and she's like, you can read the statute, you figure it out. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't, because I am completely this isn't my realm. It was education law and in the schools, and something so close to your heart, your kids, right? And it was very clear to me at that moment. I was so glad that I had her, because I was so angry, sad, upset, and she's like, no, we're making progress, that voice of reason that can see we're on the right track. And I think too often we don't talk about how important that is to have that objectivity.
100%. And the other thing that a lawyer brings to this, you just mentioned, you could go and read the statute, but you and I both know the law isn't exactly what's written in the statute. The law depends on how has that statute been interpreted by the courts over the years. And even more importantly than that, how does the particular judge that you are going to have interpret that statute and that case law? And that's something that I don't care where you go on the internet, unless you are in that judge's courtroom day after day after day, you don't know the answer to that question. And if you don't know the answer to that question, you can't assess what your best option is in any given situation, because you don't know. But a lawyer who appears in front of that judge all the time, they can tell you, yeah, this is how this judge thinks, what they're likely to do. And therefore, here's what your best option would be.
It's so true. So true. Now, for our listeners, how do attorneys determine what to charge you?
They make it up. and they decide for themselves. I mean, honestly, I mean, what is it? But they charge an hourly rate, right? So what people I don't think appreciate until you're in the situation and you get the first bill and you get sticker shock is that an attorney sells their time, right? Most divorce attorneys, there are some divorce attorneys that are going to flat fee models of various sorts, but for the most part, divorce lawyers are going to charge by the hour, especially the better quality divorce lawyers are going to charge by the hour. So every time they have to pick up the phone, open an email, go to court, do anything on your case, they're going to charge you for the time. And it adds up really quickly.
It does. It does. And, you know, of course, that's what our firm does. And we base the initial retainer usually on the facts and circumstances. We have ranges, but, you know, we send an itemized invoice twice a month. You always know what's going on. But, you know, I know it can be overwhelming. And Karen, do you have any tips for our listeners when it comes to reading and understanding, you know, what billable work is? Like what is going on with that invoice?
If they have, first of all, if you as a client get an invoice and you don't understand what it means, call your lawyer and ask. I mean, that's really the best way, because every lawyer has a little bit different words they might use in a bill that to means this, that, or the other thing. But, you know, if you have a question, call your lawyer. It's not, you know, it's not a problem. It's not taboo. It's not something you should just push off to the side. Call the lawyer, have a conversation and say, what does this mean? Why am I charged for this? Why am I charged for that? They will explain it to you. If they can't explain it to you, that's a problem. But they'll let you know what it is. And, you know, your firm sounds like they have really good and open, transparent billing processes, which is fabulous. Some lawyers don't. I've heard cases, especially I get the lawyer stories because now I work as a coach. So my clients do all the telling on the lawyers. And there are some lawyers who just, like, people will go months without a bill and they have no idea where they're at. That is not okay. It is also okay to call your lawyer and say, hey, can I get a bill? I don't know. Do I owe you money? Do I still have money in the bank with you? I don't understand what's going on. And part of the reason that's so important is that if I ask you, as any normal human, who did you talk to 2 months ago on Tuesday at 4:00? And what did you say? You're not going to remember, right? So when you get a bill that's months and months old, you don't remember if those things happened, didn't happen. You have no way of assessing whether you're being billed properly or not. So at the very least, you should be, as a client, getting a bill from a lawyer every month.
And I agree completely. It, you know, from my standpoint, the bill should be telling you the story of your case and what is happening and when it's happening and what all of the people are doing to move your case forward, and should be in plain English and easy to understand, because usually, I mean, you've communicated, this is what you've expected to happen. And, you know, I think that is really important. I've heard those stories too. Like, I haven't received a bill in like 4 months, or my husband's attorney, he says he never gets billed. He hasn't gotten a bill yet. And I get a bill. And it's like, well, I can't speak to that. I can't speak to what goes on in other firms. But now, how about this? Is the saying you get what you pay for true with divorce as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I would love to tell listeners, no, that's not true, but it is. Now, that doesn't mean that a lower priced attorney is always going to be bad or inexperienced or what have you. I'm not saying that at all. But the more you have to lose, the more you want to find an attorney who is experienced and has the expertise and the years behind them of being able to know, what is this judge going to do? What is the other side like? Who are the other attorneys? Because that makes a big difference in how easy or hard it is to resolve your case, right? You and I both know that some lawyers have a reputation for just churning a file and making everything difficult. And then when they hit their billing level or their level of, they feel like they did their job, now you can settle for the same thing you could have settled for 6 months ago, but they wouldn't, right? So it just, you know, all of that factors in. But at the end of the day, you do get what you pay for. And if you get the person who this is their first divorce, or they do this in addition to 5,000 other things. Unless you live in a rural area, that's a different discussion, right?
Right.
But you get somebody who doesn't specialize in divorce, or it's your brother's sister's best friend's uncle who really does real estate, but they're doing you a favor. They're not doing you a favor. I promise you.
Absolutely. Now, in your book, you mentioned that sometimes, and especially if your case is going have complex and have issues like high asset division, hidden assets, maybe complicated custody, that you do need a very experienced lawyer, and that does typically come with a higher price tag. But how do you know as a client, and for our listeners, what is complex and what isn't, or maybe when to look for someone in certain situations because of your particular circumstances?
If you are a W-2 employee and your spouse is a W-2 employee and you make under 6 figures a year as a family, and you have your 401k, your checking and savings account, and a house and a couple cars, that's pretty straight up. That pretty much any divorce lawyer should be able to handle that kind of situation. But if you've got complicated assets, right? Let's say you've got, instead of just a 401k, there's a pension involved, there's multiple 401ks, there's different kinds of investment accounts. You have either you or your spouse is a higher level executive. So your compensation package is more than just a W-2 salary. There's bonuses and stock options and, all kinds of different payment vehicles that are involved in your compensation plan. Or if you own a small business, right? So you've got money coming in, you've maybe got employees, you've got a business account and a personal account. Hopefully you've got a business account and a personal account. And, the more things you have, the more complicated your situation becomes. And then you need an attorney who understands all that. Or you may have complicated kid situation. Like there are some, if your kid has special needs, if your kid has, special circumstances, there are some lawyers who have dealt with that before. They're going to be better at it. So you have to find the lawyer who's got the qualifications, not just to do your divorce, but to handle the issues that are going to come up in your divorce, which is specific to you.
Right. And, and it's so important. And I know for a lot of our listeners and a lot of clients, and I tell them all the time, they don't know what they don't know. Right. So a lot of what we do, and I know what you do, is education and just trying to help the listeners, and for us helping women really just make good informed decisions by giving them a lot of information so that then they can make a better decision. But, no matter the situation, nobody wants to feel like they've made a bad investment. Can you share with our listeners some tips on how to be prepared to get everything out of your investment in an attorney?
You've got to learn how to work with an attorney in the way that attorney does business or operates. And here's what I mean. If you send your attorney like 10 different emails in one day, asking one question per email, they're going to bill you to read all 10 emails. Or if you send them the rant, these were my personal favorite as a lawyer. You get the, single-spaced 2-page rant with all of your complaints. That's great, but now you're going to pay your attorney to read that. So you really want to group all your questions into one email, ask it one time, and then your attorney can sit down and at one point answer all your questions. It's going to be way more efficient.
And I know that, and I think it's, well, I've practiced family law for so long. I couldn't remember the other one, but it is very, I think in a lot of ways, very particular to family law because there's just a lot of emotional triggers, I think, that, are going on during the process. And the majority of our clients have not had that relationship with an attorney before. So they don't know. They don't know what's appropriate, what's not. And when you allow those emotional triggers to get you fired up, who are you going to go to? Okay, I'm going to fire it at my attorney, right?
Right. But if you're really emotionally riled up, call your therapist. Don't call your lawyer, because the therapist is actually trained to deal with your emotions.
Yes.
And they're a lot less expensive than your lawyer.
Exactly. Or your coach or a good friend, somebody who, if you're just wanting to vent, that's not going to
100%.
Right. Well, okay. So now is the perfect time for our break, but it's just so good. I love everything we're talking about, but we will be right back. And for our listeners, we would appreciate it if you are enjoying this topic or like our podcast, that you would give us a 5-star review so that other women going through the divorce process can find our show and join our community. And we will be right back. Oh, this is good. Okay, I like this. All right, ready. Okay, we are back from our break. And again, today I am joined by Karen Covy, and we are discussing maximizing your investment into a divorce attorney. So Karen, you mentioned, when we were doing our preliminaries, and to our producer, Olivia, something really interesting that she brought up to me that I want to get into. Your idea of the temporarily insane and the permanent insane. And what does this mean? What does this mean? We got to talk about it.
Okay. Well, there's a saying amongst lawyers that criminal law takes the worst people and puts them on their best behavior, and divorce law takes people, the best people at their worst behavior, right? And so divorce rarely brings out the best in anyone. You just go, and it's normal, and it happens all the time for a person who's otherwise a pretty rational human being to go a little crazy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Somebody pokes your button or presses your trigger, however you want. And all of a sudden you're like turning into this screaming maniac, or you're sobbing uncontrollably in the grocery aisle, or you're, things happen that aren't you, right? Behaviors happen that aren't you because it is so emotional. That's normal behavior. And you kind of, when you're going through a divorce, expect it of yourself and give yourself some grace, and expect it of your spouse. It's normal if they act different or wild. You're like, who is this person? I don't get it. That's one thing. But when you've got a spouse who is, let's just call it a high conflict personality going into the divorce, like your spouse was really difficult, maybe a narcissist, maybe, abusive, verbally abusive, hopefully not physically abusive, but they were really difficult to deal with before your divorce. They are not going to have a personality transplant during your divorce, right? Things aren't going to get better. Those are the people that I call not in a technical sense, but just sort of, air quotes, permanently insane. They are going to be the person that they are, but worse. They're going to be that personality on steroids. If you know that's who you're married to, don't pretend that your divorce is going to be amicable and easy. It's good to hope for. I mean, I'm right with you. That would be awesome, but it's probably not. So deal with the person that you are married to. Go in with your eyes wide open. And what is it? Expect the best, but prepare for the worst.
Mm-hmm. And that's such great advice. And for our clients, they know who they're married to, right? We're just, as the attorney, we hear a little bit about it, but they've lived with it, and they're going to be pretty spot on as to probably a lot of their reactions and behavior during this process.
Yeah, I always, I tell my clients, whether I'm coaching them or, when I was, lawyering, being their lawyer, it's like, I know the law, I know the system, I can fill you in on a lot, but you know your spouse. You're the expert on your spouse. And if you don't bring that piece of information to the table, to your lawyer, you're not going to be able to maximize your investment with your lawyer, because they're going to do things that trigger your spouse, that set them off, that get the opposite result of the one that you want to get, because they don't know what your spouse's reaction is, but you do. So if you and your lawyer can partner as a team, you're going to do better. It's going to be more efficient. It's going to be less expensive, and you're going to have a better chance of ending up where you want to end up once the whole divorce is over.
Now, when we do talk about, though, like the varying degrees of insanity that do occur and that are to be expected during divorce, how does this change, though, how expensive and lengthy your divorce can be?
Look, if you're married to a high conflict person, your divorce is not going to be cheap. I mean, divorce, let me just put this out there. Divorce is never cheap.
Right.
Having a big wedding isn't cheap either. Right. So, there's going to be money involved. However, it's more expensive to do it wrong and to try to fix it in the back end than it is to just pay to do it right the first time. It's like anything else. But if you're married to a high conflict person, somebody who's either going to drag their feet, they're going to bury their head in the sand, they're not going to respond, they're going to make everything hard, or they're going to make everything a fight, that's going to cost money. And, no matter how you want to go through your divorce, it's going to end up being messier than you want and more expensive. And if you know that going in, there are things you can do to try to contain the cost, trying to figure out what it is that your spouse really cares about, and maybe making sure that they get that and you get something else that you care about. And, you try to, again, work with the personalities involved. There's a whole lot of psychology in divorce, right?
Yes.
And if you can use the psychology to your advantage, you can, keep a container on the costs. But quite frankly, if you're married to a high conflict person, that's going to just straight out of the box increase the cost of your divorce.
Yeah, and it really does. And again, there is a lot of strategy with the psychology of how things go, particularly when it comes to when, it's time to try to mediate or settle, and that strategy. And, the idea that there can be many different personalities involved, and those personalities really can affect how your process goes and ultimately ends. And, and how does this cast of characters matter? I mean, for Karen, we've got the judge, attorney, client, everyone involved. How does that all play out?
The cast, every single person affects the outcome and the way that it goes, right? Mm-hmm. If you've got two lawyers, people always used to, they think that they want two lawyers that hate each other, right? They want to fight. That's the worst thing that can happen. You get two lawyers who hate each other, they're going to be working up their personal stuff on your dime, right? They're going to be fighting just to fight because they don't like each other. That's not your best strategy. You want two lawyers who are reasonable, who are good advocates, mm-hmm. and who will fight when they need to, but not make a fight that they don't have to make, right?
And I think, that's such great advice. People, I don't know why they don't understand them.
And people, people would get upset all the time. Back in the day, pre-COVID, when courtrooms were open and you could walk in and, see what was going on, people would go to court and they'd see their lawyer and the other, their spouse's lawyer, like smiling, laughing, talking, and they would get angry. So a lot of times what they don't understand is that lawyers have to work in this community over and over again. And you want somebody who's well-respected and who doesn't fight with everybody, because that's only going to cost you money. So, so many times the lawyers and the judge will be in the back and they'll be talking like normal humans. But then once they come out, they've got to put on the stern face and, put on the show of, we don't like each other. But that's not the way it is, really, most of the time. Sometimes it is. These days, there are a lot of people that are shall we say, less civil to each other than they used to be. But you want lawyers who are reasonable and get along but will fight for you. I'm not saying doormat.
Yeah, right. And who can say, okay, we're going to agree to disagree, but we're not fighting just to fight, because that never benefits the client. And many times that's not what the client wants. They want an advocate, but they don't understand that can, that doesn't mean you're screaming at the other person and, hanging up on them. It means, you're achieving the goals for the client.
That is the key. What you just said is the perfect explanation of what you want in a lawyer. You want someone who is going to be on the same page with you and work to achieve your goals, whatever those are, right? And that's also going to be the most cost-effective way to work with a lawyer as well.
Absolutely. And, and we're just speaking on personality and not personality disorders, because of course that, is a whole nother episode, but you have also spoken on who you're dealing with personality wise can change your legal strategy. Can you elaborate on that for us?
Well, yeah. If your spouse has got a personality disorder, I know everybody today thinks they're divorcing a narcissist. Some people are, some people aren't. It is a clinical diagnosis. And I think we have, people these days are, bouncing the word around lightly. But let's just say that you're divorcing someone who is high conflict personality. Somebody who isn't going to tell the truth, no matter what, who is going to hide money or assets or information, no matter what. Well, if you go into mediation with that person, it's not going to work. The only way mediation works is if everybody comes clean with their financial information. If you're dealing with somebody who you know is never going to do that, then going to mediation is going to be a waste of time and money. And I'm a big proponent of mediation, right? Fighting in court should always be your last resort, but you've got to understand who the person is that you're divorcing and the personality of the other lawyer. This is also interesting. If your spouse may want, a collaborative divorce, for example. This happens often. But if the lawyer they choose is not really trained in collaborative divorce, which, by the way, doesn't just mean that you're getting along nicely, it's a whole separate process, right?
Right.
So if your spouse hires someone who's not a collaboratively trained divorce lawyer, you are not going to have a collaborative divorce, period, full stop, right? It's just not going to, it could be something else. It doesn't mean you have to fight till the death, but it's not going to be that thing, right? So the personality and the training and the approach of your spouse's lawyer is also something that factors into how do you resolve this whole situation?
Exactly. And, I, speaking on that, because sometimes, and I know you've heard this, the client will come, they say, she's like, my husband says, blah, blah, blah. This is what we're doing. He's agreeable. And this, he said he didn't even know why his attorney sent that. And, I have to tell them sometimes, I'm like, okay, well, he's paying this attorney and the attorney keeps doing it. So I think we got to go with what the attorney's saying. And maybe your husband is, prolonging it or not being completely honest with you. But, he's paying this person to continue to behave in this manner. So you got to wonder what's going on, but it's complicated. They're always like, oh no, but he swears he didn't mean it.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And that's tough to deal with because it's like, wow, but that's what we're dealing with. And maybe he's not being as forthright with you, but telling his attorney, what he truly wants to happen.
Yeah. And if you can say, okay, if your spouse is saying that to you, then have him go talk to his lawyer.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because this is what's coming through. And that's also part of the challenge with the legal system and the way lawyers operate. It's like a giant game of telephone, right?
Yeah.
One client says something to the lawyer who talks to the other lawyer who talks to the client and then it goes back around and things get changed. They get lost in translation. And so if what your spouse is saying is different than what the lawyer is seeing or what his or her lawyer is doing, there's a disconnect. And, one real easy way to figure that out, put everybody in the same room at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Have a little settlement conference or have a little come to Jesus and say, and then your spouse, you'll be able to figure out pretty quickly if your spouse is telling you the truth, because if they back down in that meeting, then you know that it's not your spouse. Your spouse may not be telling you the whole truth. Let's just put it that way.
Exactly. Now, I am going to ask you a question because we talked all about, knowing the players and their relationships. Now, on one hand, those are good reasons to hire somebody locally who's aware and knows, the judges and the attorneys. But what if, are there sometimes downsides to that where you wouldn't want that maybe in an instance? Maybe if your town is very small or something, or you feel as though that could be a problem. Or if you feel like, you're divorcing an influential person or family in a small town, do you feel like sometimes it might make sense to branch out a little?
Yes, absolutely. But it's very circumstance specific, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where I've seen this play out, and probably you as well, is when someone who is a lawyer or is a judge who is known in the legal community is getting a divorce. There's some really good reasons why you wouldn't want your financial situation. You don't want your colleagues to know what's going on in your personal life. And
Right.
if you're a judge, it may not be best for you to get divorced in the same courthouse that you're working, right? There are a lot of reasons to do that. If you're, the problem if you're a public figure is
Mm-hmm.
public figures are public figures everywhere, right? Going one county
Yeah.
over might not solve the problem, but there are circumstances where it does make a difference.
Absolutely. Well, it is time for another break, and we will be right back. And listeners, if you are enjoying the show, we would ask that you leave us a review, and also please share it with a friend. And we will be right back. We are back from our last break. And again, today I'm joined by Karen Covy. Now, in the last segment, we explored a lot about how the different personalities can change the process, your strategy as an attorney, and how to be mindful of that investment. Now, in our last segment, we're going to be talking about setting goals that can maximize your financial contributions to an attorney. All right. So why is it important to set forth goals early on in the process, Karen?
Because if you don't know what you're shooting for, you don't have a very good chance of getting it, right? And what people don't realize in divorce is that as you go through the process, you are going to be forced to make more important life decisions in a relatively short period of time than you will in any other similar period of time in your life. And if you make those decisions randomly, you're going to end up wherever you end up, right? But if you keep your goal in mind, and whenever a decision comes up, you measure it against your goal, and you just ask yourself one simple question. Is doing it this way, is making this decision going to get me closer to my goal or farther away?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now everything is aligning. You are aligning everything to get to the one thing or the two things that are the most important to you, rather than being scattered all over the place.
Absolutely. And it's as if you are in our legal team strategy meetings, because that is part of the conversation when we have an issue and the attorneys have ideas. And so I'll say, but you have to ask, is that going to get you closer to the objective? Or, they tell the issue and you have to ask, but what's your objective, right? What is it you're trying to get? Because we need to know where we want to go to figure out the best way to get there.
100%. And here's the other thing about goals. You can't have 500 of them. Your goal
Sure.
can't be, I want everything, because too many goals is like having no goal at all. Then you're still in that scattershot approach. So, and this is the hardest thing for people to understand. You get to have one main goal, maybe two, maybe one financial and one kids. That's it. And that doesn't mean that you're not trying to accomplish anything else, but you know what your main goals are. And if they change, also okay. But the more they change, the more you have to understand that your lawyer strategy up to that point was going one direction. And if you say, no, I don't want this anymore, I want that. Now you've got to change course. And there may be some things that don't work out so well, because the sooner you can adopt a strategy, know what your goals are and shoot for those, the better chance you have of getting all the pieces lined up to get to that goal at the end.
Okay, now let me ask you this. Now, can having these goals cost you more or less?
100% less, because you're now focused, right? When you're all over the place, if you don't know what's important, you're going to pay for everything, whether it's important or not. You're going to pay for your lawyer to, I want, get this and get that, and I want this and I want that. And again, if you're going in too many directions at once, you don't move forward. You stay stuck. And so, having a goal is always going to help you to move forward towards that goal. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be cheap necessarily. For example, if your goal is, let's say you want sole custody of your child for whatever reason, maybe your spouse lives or wants to move to a different state. And, that's one of the most difficult situations, I think, as a divorce professional, when one parent's going to be in California, one's going to be in New York, and where do the kids live? And it's just not going to be easy for anybody, right? You've got to decide that. Okay, if that's the fight you're fighting, and both of you are all in for having the kids live, in your own respective states, you're going to pay for that. That's
Right.
going to be expensive no matter what. There's just no way around it. So you have to know when you're making a decision, when you're deciding what's your goal, you may have to give up something else. If having your kids with you in, I'm making this up,
Yeah.
California, is really important, you might have to pay way more for your divorce to fight that fight if your
Hmm.
spouse won't give in and you can't work anything out.
Right.
That's going to cost you more than if both of you live in California.
Hmm. But and I think though that having that goal centered approach, at least you've set a goal and because then your attorney should be able to lay it out for you. And
Yeah.
then you can weigh it and decide, okay, this is what this is going to take to maybe get there, right? And
Right.
then you can make a decision. Now, say one of my goals is getting alimony.
Okay.
How can I, as a listener going through a divorce, be organized and prepared for my attorney in this situation?
The more financial information you can get to your attorney, the better off you're going to be. And if you're looking for alimony, the question that any judge is going to have is, well, why can't you work? Right? What have
Mhm.
you been doing during the course of the marriage? So, any information that you can provide to your attorney to say, okay, I didn't work because I have 3 kids, and here is a schedule of all their activities that I drive them to every single day. And
Mhm.
here's a list of, the special needs that they might have, and all the doctors that I have to take them to, or the therapists, or the, whatever. And you can account for how you spend your time. And any judge could see you don't have time for a job because you're not maybe being paid for the work that you're doing, but you're working all day long, right?
Mhm.
That's the kind of information that's going to be gold to an attorney versus just saying, well, I want alimony because I want alimony. I mean,
Mhm.
that's going to be a harder fight. So any information you can provide to your attorney, and also things like, what's your educational background? What did you do before you got married? What was your
Mhm.
job? What was your income level? What's your potential? Maybe you haven't worked in, again, I'm making this up, at 10 years, let's say. Okay, it's been 10 years. And the industry that you were in, let's say you were in nursing 10 years ago, and you might have kept up your license, but you haven't actually worked for 10
Right.
years. So all the technology has changed. All the protocols and the processes have
Mhm.
changed. Your ability to get a job making what you used to make probably isn't going to be good. There's going to be a ramp up period. Those are the kinds of things that your lawyer needs to know. If your lawyer doesn't know anything about you, how can they argue for you?
Exactly. Exactly. And that's such a great point. And they do need that information. And if they're not asking you, that should be a red flag, right, Karen? I mean, they really need to know and understand who you are, who you were during the marriage, and what parts of that are relevant and are going to support achieving your goals now in the divorce.
Exactly. And I've worked with clients who, for example, it's important for them to establish what the lifestyle was during the marriage, right?
Hmm.
That, their spouse, now that they're getting a divorce, the spouse is saying, well, you could be working, and look at, you're traveling all over the world, and you're taking expensive trips, and on and on and on. But when you look at the credit card statements from the last 3 years pre-divorce, both of the spouses were taking expensive
Hmm.
trips, and that's just the lifestyle that they had established, right? So having things like credit card bills, state documents to prove what your lifestyle was could be critically important in your case.
Absolutely. Now, here's an interesting question that I know you're going to have an answer for our listeners, but how do you decide which goals maybe you are willing to compromise on? Because we've talked about this, there's going to be a lot of decisions and you're going to have some goals, but if it's going to settle, there's going to have to be some compromise negotiation.
The most important thing is to figure it out before you get in the negotiation, right? So I can't say to anybody what you should or shouldn't have as your most important goals. That's not for anyone to decide except you. But it's
Mhm.
going to take some soul searching. It's going to take some sitting down with a pen and paper, writing out all your goals and trying to rank them and saying to yourself, well, if I got that, but I didn't get that, am I okay with it? What if I got something else, but I didn't get, and you play with the ideas and try them on first. Because if you wait until you get into a negotiation or a pretrial setting or a mediation, what's going to happen is you're going to get taken by surprise. You're going to make decisions that you wish you hadn't made later, right? Because you just blurt something out because you haven't thought about it. So it doesn't matter what you rank first, second, third, fourth, 10th. What matters is that you think about it and make those decisions on the front end and I recommend people make lists. This is the stuff I care about. This is the stuff I can let go, because in the moment, if you get emotionally triggered, your gut reaction might be like, no, you can't have that. I once had a settlement. We spent hours and hours in a settlement conference. This was not an easy case to settle. We finally got through everything. And at literally the very last minute, we're about to walk out the door. And the husband looks at the wife and he says, what about the vacuum cleaner? And the wife goes, and she exploded and the husband exploded. And before we know it, they're at each other's throat. The entire settlement is out the window. And thankfully, there was a reasonable lawyer on the other side. And him and I are looking at each other like, what just happened? And so we said, wait. All right, time out, guys. What kind of vacuum cleaner? Like, is this some kind of fancy schmancy? They're like, it's a Hoover. Okay. And so the lawyer said, look, both of us looked at each other and he's like, you are going to pay more to fight over the vacuum. You could buy 10 vacuum cleaners. He took a quarter out of his pocket. He looked at the two of them and said, heads or tails. And we were done.
Oh, that's a great story, Karen. And I've been in mediations, and then there's like this one more. And I've been the attorney before to be like, no, you don't get to ask that. And we are done. And I've also said to the other person, go back and tell them no. Like, we're not doing this. Do not mess this up. Like, they need to, move on. But it's so true. It's the preparation, emotionally as well as financially, and on, hey, where am I willing to move? What's non-negotiable? What is negotiable? How do we get there? Because that's the only way. I mean, if you're fortunate enough to settle, that's how you got to do it. And that, at the end of the day, like we talked about, is probably going to be better off for you at the end of the day if you have that opportunity to settle your divorce rather than litigate and having a judge decide.
Yeah, having a stranger in a black robe decide what you're going to do with your money and your family for the rest of your life. Like, I don't know any planet on which that is a good choice. Unless you have no choice and your spouse is being so unreasonable that you can't do any worse. Okay, let the judge decide, but the judge doesn't know you. He or she doesn't know your kids. It's always better to keep control of your life in your own hands.
Agreed. Well, lastly, Karen, before we go, can you please impart on our listeners what you have learned about advocating for and empowering women and families throughout your career?
Oh my goodness. It's all about empowering women and families. And the more it's all the things that we've been talking about today. The more educated you are, the more information you have, the better prepared you are. The more you sit down with a coach, a therapist, a lawyer, you have a team put together and you establish your goals and you have a strategy and you stay the course and you work the plan, right? Mm-hmm. The better you're going to do. And that's what it's all about, because at the end of the day, if you're okay, and kind of a revolutionary concept, if your spouse is okay, as okay as he or she can be, your kids are going to be, they're going to do better. They're going to be okay. They love you both. And they just want to grow up and be kids. Right. So the fighting in court is not what a child's idea of a good time is.
Agreed. Well, we've reached the end of our show. Karen, such a delightful guest and so much information. Thank you so much for being here today.
It has been my pleasure. Thank you, Heather, for having me.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, you can find her at KarenCovy.com. Her podcast is called Off the Fence. And of course, all of her information will be linked below in the episode description. And we look forward to having you back in the future, Karen.
Thank you. I look forward to being here.
All right. So to our listeners, if you or someone you know is going through divorce or is thinking about a divorce, of course, reach out to us at FloridaWomen'sLawGroup.com. Also join our Facebook group, Women Winning Divorce. The link will be below in the episode description. And thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this show, please leave us a review and let us know who you would like to be our next guest. Thank you. From being served to preparing for trial, Divorce 101 will prepare you end to end for the divorce process. I'm Heather Quick, attorney and CEO of Florida Women's Law Group. Join us over the next 6 weeks to feel empowered and educated about a complex and often challenging legal process. Our online course is designed to provide an overview of what to expect, what to prepare for, and offer guidance you may need to succeed and win at life. Over 6 weeks of video and additional resources, we are confident that you will finish our course feeling inspired and educated. Find out more at floridawomensLawGroup.com/divorce-101 or call us at 904-567-0121.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of Women Winning Divorce. My goal is to elevate your life and the way you are thinking so that you are best equipped to win at life. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe so you automatically get my new shows every week. And I would love to hear from you personally. Come join the conversation on social and join our Facebook group, Women Winning Divorce. We welcome your comments and suggestions. We want to bring you content that helps move your life forward. Women Winning Divorce is the place for an elevated conversation on how women can thrive during times of adversity in order to live their best life.